Welcome to Stifel's Sightlines podcast, focusing each week on a topic or two important to investors. Well, greetings and welcome to the Sightlines podcast. This is Michael O'Keefe, Stifel's Chief Investment Officer. Hey, in this episode, I want to do a third spotlight on our Outlook report. Our report was called Outlook 2025 Gravitational Shifts, and recall that it was comprised or is comprised of a number of articles. The one I want to get into today is entitled The World in 2035 From Vision to Value. So essentially the idea here is we really kind of drew on the work around our long-term themes, right? So we have 5 long-term themes that we use to try to understand the future and how that world's changing, how that might relate to economic development and market opportunity, basically investment opportunity. And so we penned this article. It was a really fun one to do in the sense that we essentially brainstormed, the team, we all brainstormed on and tried to come up with 10 sort of transformative ideas, 10 innovations that we think might happen over the next decade to give us a sense for how the world's changing as a result of these long-term themes, right? And so what I want to do is go through each theme and then just sprinkle in, even though there's a lot of sort of, cross connection here, I want to essentially relate a couple of these transformative ideas to our longer term themes. And again, I would invite you to go to stifelinsights.com and check out the full report, including this article. But let's jump into it. The fourth industrial revolution is a theme we've talked about a lot. It's really the idea that technology and technological innovation has broken down the boundaries between the physical, digital, and biological worlds. And so a couple of things that we highlighted in this article. One is quantum computing. So we called it quantum leaps. And the idea here is that quantum computers will really accelerate innovation. So think things like using AI, for example, to develop medication, to develop drugs. When quantum computing becomes more commercialized, that's really going to accelerate that learning by, a massive factor. And so the idea of, therefore, the innovation that comes from some of this modeling will just be that much more quick, and so the idea of that innovation is kind of exciting. Anyway, second one is a rise of bionics. The idea that we've got better and better artificial limbs or implantable devices or bioartificial organs, things that it's really where the technology is affecting the support that we're able to provide individuals who need it, right? In terms of a limb or new organ or something like that. Next up is securing strategic resources. So this is how companies and governments are prioritizing the development and the protection of critical industries, resources, and services. And people think energy right out of the gate, but you also want to be thinking food, you want to be thinking water, among other things, right? There's like materials and other things that are out there. In any event, the two transformative ideas that we penned in this article, one is vertical farming. So the idea that indoor high-tech stacked crops in a controlled environment for that environment could improve food production, make it more efficient. And so again, it's sort of a wild idea to think vertically when it comes to farming, but that's one thing that we got into a bit. The second one is nuclear power, and in particular, the idea that small modular reactors can be produced relatively easily and spread out, right? And ultimately provide a good amount of power. And we're always, of course, looking for alternatives in terms of power and new innovation. And of course, for electricity in particular, the demands are increasing quite significantly because of things like artificial intelligence. And so, sort of the draw upon data centers and server farms and all that, and to kind of build and utilize these large learning models, essentially the demand for power is up a lot. So looking for ways to provide that power in a cost-effective ways will remain in keen focus. Shifting demographics is a theme that sort of captures how the global population is changing, the dynamics are changing, it creates challenges, it creates opportunities. And one thing I'd say is that one of the shifts is longevity, right? People are living longer. and that it's almost like that goal brings focus back to treatments for disease, wellness, and longevity. So a couple of ideas that we included in this article. One is the idea of using AI, as I alluded to a moment ago, to influence sort of clinical trials and drug discovery. And there's this optimism that's building that these capabilities will make the sort of the ability to simulate trying out drugs, basically, have that process go a lot faster and in some ways a lot safer. And ultimately, dramatic things like the potential to beat some kinds of cancer are on the table, right? And so it's sort of doing that more quickly, more efficiently, at less cost. And again, I would say for a lot of reasons, we're still in relatively early days for that type of innovation. Anyway, a second one is the concept of digital twins. And here in particular, what we're really talking about is having kind of everything about you as a person, as a physical being, that can be sort of represented digitally, represented on a computer. So imagine your DNA, your conditions, et cetera, sort of being captured and allowing essentially medical professionals or wellness professionals, frankly, to kind of understand you without actually interacting with you physically. And so the idea is to be able to use systems to understand a patient and be able to optimize and customize health and an area of focus on wellness and longevity. And so digital twinning is the phrase that's used for that. Anyway, next up is the new consumer. And this obviously captures sort of innovation in how consumers' preferences are changing. So it's simple things like e-commerce and being able to order something without really thinking about it. Do it on your smartphone and boom, something an hour later or a day later, the stuff's at your house. But it also can relate to how stores are presented, and the idea of not needing to go to the cashier anymore, as well as sort of what ultimately gets presented in a physical store. All of that, and so therefore the idea of sort of innovation. Preferences for moving around, like driving versus taking, Ubers or Lyfts or whatever. And so the two that we pinned up anyway around this, number one is the idea, it's a little dramatic, of flying taxis. But to say it a little more broadly, the idea of flying vehicles, drones, for example, providing transportation, but also the idea of last mile deliveries. So just imagine that instead of the truck driving up, we've talked a lot about this, people talk about it. Instead, it's a drone that gets it either to or almost to your home, and so a lot of focus on that. Anyway, next up, the second idea under the new consumer is the idea of AI agents, and this I think it's very, very early days, but these large language learning models basically create the opportunity for the systems to understand and be able to interact with people about certain professional services. So think accounting kind of topics, or is doing your taxes, or even legal questions, so lawyer type interaction, or even for the medical profession, sort of bots. I know there's already some that are available for nursing, but that know enough and can provide specific guidance, right? And again, it's super early days and it's a little scary, but the reality is we think in 10 years, we will all be used to using these kinds of bots, especially as a first step, right, in interacting with professionals like this. Last long-term theme is productive competition. And this is ultimately captured, to say it almost simply, is that rivalry and competition ultimately strengthens the competitors and drives innovation that can improve the quality of life and create a value for consumers and for the economy and businesses, honestly. And so the two ideas around this that we got into, one is humanoid robots. And so, there's definitely development happening where robots are being developed that basically look like humans and can walk around and kind of conduct themselves like humans. And, you can imagine having one in your home, cleaning your house or whatever, but ultimately a pretty dramatic application would be the battlefield, right? So already we've got aerial vehicles, unmanned, and drones or like drones, and then even robotic dogs, for example. And so just imagine essentially a battlefield where either some or all of the sort of soldiers, if you will, for one side or the other are just robots, and that's kind of intense, right? So that's anyway one idea, and then finally, and we sort of I think conclude in the article, if I recall, with the idea of the space race. So space means business is the tag phrase we used, and this is just capturing the idea that the space economy is just developing. We're seeing private businesses push to get into it, push to be able to put rockets up into space and ultimately deploy, of course, satellites for global communication, for navigation, for weather, but it's going to go beyond that. And, again, same thing. We're in very early days. And so what we anticipate over the next decade is different forms of discovery on how companies and countries can use space to advance their efforts. And it's really early still, but you can just imagine there being sort of a developing sort of space economy that everybody's participating in. Anyway, that's what we wanted to cover in this episode. So again, I invite you to go to stifelinsights.com, check out Outlook 2025, Gravitational Shifts. There's the full report, a video, a recently held client webinar, now the replay. And of course, in it, as I mentioned at the start, this article, The World in 2035 from Vision to Value, getting into these 10 transformative ideas anchored on our long-term themes. So I really, really appreciate, as ever, you listening to this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks again for listening to Stifel's Sightlines. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to automatically receive each week's podcast in your feed.